What up? Welcome to the slightly delayed H2 astrological forecast with our astrologer just joining us now. Thank you, everyone who is in the chat, for your patience while we, twice now dealt with some gremlins. This is round two. Round one was supposed to be in Austin, and I had many fine jokes prepared for that. That one was on me. Well, it was actually on the city of Austin with its terrible internet. But no, we made it, and you know what? We spoke about it afterwards, after that failed attempt at recording earlier in the week. This feels more like us, this sort of trans-hemispherical conversation. What do you think, Austin?
Absolutely. Well, our sleep schedules are offset by almost exactly this 7 hours.
Yeah.
Right. We literally talked less when you were in the same hemisphere. Because I would often talk to you when it was, I don't know, things had wound down and it was like, I don't know, 1, 2, 3 in the morning, which I'm always up at. And, that was bright and early in your day. But I would try to talk to you at that time and found out very immediately that you were asleep.
I turn into a pumpkin 10:15 p.m. Anything after that, no. I can't even make the midnight. That's not it. But it was hilarious. And I'd see your green dot, and I'd be like, no, because I'd be up at 6 in our time zone when I was there. And I'm like, I'll be up at 6. I'm like, no, he's just, the dot's still green. He's not there. There's no point.
The tab is just still open.
Yeah.
No, but I mean, that is, I don't know if you wanted to be generous or complimentary, you could say that, that's the hemisphere spanning nature of our conversations, right? Because we have both north, south, and then I don't know, is Australia in the eastern hemisphere and America in the west? I don't know where they draw those lines.
Right? Because Australia, especially the east coast, is in line with like Hong Kong and Beijing and so on. So if they are, then I guess so. Yeah.
It's at least like a whole different continent.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And here, like, it's kind of cool to be in New Zealand again for the first, because it's still the other side of the ocean. Like, the Pacific is a hemisphere, and I flew here via Fiji, so it went Austin, LA, Nandi, and then Auckland. And Fiji's the first country, like, the international date line actually goes around it so that that it's not a mess, right? And that sort of felt, because obviously I've lost a day. I left on Wednesday morning and arrived Friday afternoon, and there's a missing day in there somewhere. And it felt kind of good to be like landing and showering in the lounge in Nandi, like at the international date line. I'm like, yeah, I've invented time travel. I'm not sure if I can scale this up and make any money off it, but something about what's been going on felt like time travel in the best possible sense. So, and then basically it's the next morning. So this seems more appropriate. This is a good time and a good time space to have the conversation.
Well, it has traditionally worked. So, right, it's approaching Lindy. So I wanted to give you a chance to make those jokes. At least, like, what were the top 1 to 3 talking to Austin while being inside of Austin jokes? I've got one.
Good. Oh yeah, you go first. Let me.
Something about how, I always wondered what Austin was like, but, having been inside you, it's surprisingly mediocre.
Yeah, all right. That's not bad, because it's true. I definitely prefer the person to the place.
Well, thank you.
Not that it wasn't that bad. I actually have no idea what I was expecting. It sort of disappointed me in 2 directions. The first one being not at all like Tim Dillon. Well, not at all like Tim Dillon said, but I almost would have been happier if the place was the complete shithole that he said it was. And it isn't. It's actually quite nice. But it also wasn't like amazing in the same way Aubrey Marcus and Joe Rogan says it is. It was actually just like, it was the middle of a heat wave. The people were sort of nice. It was like I was in East Austin, so I was in like a wealthy area, so it was just kind of like a wealthy American city. The Whole Foods was well air conditioned and well stocked. It was just a place, right? Yeah, it was good though. And at the end of, I guess, this 3 months of traveling through the Americas, it was really nice to be able to see how many people I could fit inside Austin at the one time, because you never know with those things. But like, you start off gentle, and you'd be surprised what you can fit in there. Yeah.
Very good, very good. Yeah, it's pretty unfair. I think the recent press the last couple of years for Austin has placed an unfair burden on it. Like,
Agreed.
it's a place that does its own place. It's certainly, a unique place, or at least has been a very historically kind of a unique place in Texas. And I don't know, people have expected all sorts of things from it that I don't think are
that's
necessarily...
literally the trouble, right? Like it's and I don't mean this in a negative way. It's a second tier city that's been thrust into the limelight of, like, now you have to be LA and New York all at once, and you have no time to prepare. And it's sort of, come on.
I expected Joe Rogan would be walking down the street like Spiller, like in a parade float, like tossing supplements to the people.
Yes, and
creatine
so
for
one of
all.
the things. One of the other people who moved there, podcaster type people, is Michael Malice, and he moved from New York. And I don't even think he drives yet, because you sort of don't need to in New York. I think he's learning, which seems crazy for an American, but there you go. But he was saying it doesn't have, and I know this now, I didn't understand what he meant. He's like, it actually doesn't have a downtown in the way that, like, lower Manhattan, like the financial district or something, or Midtown even, like there isn't a place that you descend on that has all the stuff you want. And I had to leave my bags at this bag drop place in a hotel on Tuesday, whatever it was, before my flight. And so I'm in the middle of what is supposed to be like the CBD of Austin. And there are like a few tall buildings, but also there are just like vacant lots and a house. And I'm like, what are you doing here? What's everyone? It's this really fascinating place where even in East Austin, bars and restaurants, but then like a house and a school, and it's almost like when you were kids and you'd be playing something like Sim City, and you go, I don't think you've zoned this world correctly, because none of this stuff seems to fit. And I found that kind of odd, but generally speaking, it was a really cool place, and really good really fun to be able to see a whole bunch of people all at once.
Yeah, totally.
Nice one.
Yeah,
well,
we had our,
no, that was basically it. I mean, we should catch up. How are your 6 months?
Pretty good. It's been a long 6 months. We were talking earlier about my Skinny Legend protocol and how that's gone nicely, proceeding according to plan. I don't know. I was thinking about sort of looking back at what I said about this 6 months ago. And what's funny is that I think I was right about all the big stuff, but I was premature. Or no, I was late. I thought I heard sabers rattling, like there were some war drums. I thought it would be the Mars and Aries with Jupiter. Right. Mm-hmm. And that has been the most active period, like since other than the very beginning, that's been the most active offensive period in the Russo-Ukrainian conflict. Right. Like it has been I did pick a good wartime, and one of those two offensives has been very effective. So I was right about that. But I didn't think it would start with the Mars and Cap at the beginning of the year. And I was wrong. And then I don't know if we talked about this. I know I talked about this in the yearly on the Astrology podcast, but I also saw bubble pops. But I was looking at the fourth quarter. Not that I predicted this would be a wonderful time economically during the first half, but I saw the theme and I saw the bubble pop theme, but I saw it later in the year again. And what was interesting is I was looking back and I was like, okay, like what did I get? Why was I late? Right? Why did I see the thing but late? And I missed something really obvious. So one of my bubble pop expectation for Q4, which is still in place, was based on Mars, a configuration between Mars and Neptune. Right, Neptune is one of the things Neptune does is it weaves fanciful illusions that exist as long as people invest belief in them, right? Which is a very powerful thing in terms of markets, right? And Mars being sharp and utilitarian, when combined with Neptune, pops bubbles. And so that still happens in Q4, but I just ignored Mars conjoining Neptune during the first half of the year, which is when
Sure.
the cascade of bubble pops actually started, right? And so,
Yeah.
just
It's
looking
actually the
looking at the right signature, but just like missing the obvious one for the what seemed more dramatic and interesting to me at the time.
it's actually been the worst 6 months for stocks in 60 years. US stocks. It's been, and obviously Bitcoin and everything that's not coming back. That's fallen forever. But like I was looking at the end of year numbers, worst for US stocks in 60 years. And also the other part of it that I was kind of looking back on it, the stuff that was in the Armstrong model for the first half of the year was obviously war in Ukraine beginning in Feb, but the other one was deliberately crashing the economy. And you said, well, you don't actually need to, it's still going to do it, which is true, but that was the other thing that turned out to be correct. Like this green transition, Buttigieg telling poor people to buy Teslas and 40 billion to Ukraine when American children can't eat. Like no one, it's like a deliberate crash. And you think, wow, that was very successful. Whoever did that to get stocks down to have the worst inflation on record and the worst 6 months of the for 60 years for stocks was a lot. It's been, as you say, it's been a long, very long 6 months.
Yeah, well, let me devil's advocate the intentional crash. So one, a wide range of intentions will destroy something that is incredibly fragile, right? And one of the issues that we're currently facing is that the go-to move for nation states these days to control inflation is to raise the interest rate, right? And like that's the move, and inflation is quite out of control, right? For probably five different big reasons right now. And so that move, like that's the move that's always made, right? And and that's going to crash, especially when things are so fragile, right? Because so many things were bubbled up. One, because what is that cranky old like Austrian school economist guy? He calls it
Down.
the everything bubble.
Yeah.
Smith,
Yeah.
blah blah blah. Smith, something something Smith. You turned me on to him 10 years ago, but
Charles E. Smith.
yeah,
The
Charles
guy
Hugh
who
Smith.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's been talking about the everything bubble for a while, and so when you're in an everything bubble phase, and you grip and then yank on what has been, I don't know, for 80 years as more a standard lever of control. It doesn't just like slow things down, right? If it kills the sharks, right, it kills all the things that depend on constant movement just to breathe.
Yeah. It's interesting, right? Because that's especially when it comes to Powell. So Fed Chairman Powell, he keeps pushing, which is true because there is just the one lever, and so the last 18 months, the Biden administration's gone from there is no inflation to inflation is transitory to inflation is good to Putin did it, none of which is true. And now they're trying to throw Powell under the bus by saying, oh, we should have normalized rates earlier. And Powell going like, the rate, he actually knows the rate rises aren't going to do shit for the fact that we've kind of got this like at least 3-year inertia that's coming through from a supply chain and everything else perspective, right?
Yeah.
So how long do you think that goes for, right? Because it seems particularly Uranian, and it's funny, like when I look at the forecast models for next year, we certainly, particularly when it comes to hydrocarbons, like crude's going to get to like 230 to 250. That's my sell signal when it gets to 230 next year, right? So that still has more of a run up, a lot more of a run up to go. But then it looks like inflation not necessarily goes away, but is like less of an issue towards the end of next year. So if that's the case, what do you think? Like, where is the inflation in the sky, you think?
Okay, so I think, as any analyst would tell you, the effect of rising prices right now is a singular output of a lot of different inputs, right? And I'd say the same is true astrologically.
Yeah.
So one of them that that we're done with by the end of next year is the Uranus and Taurus thing.
That's what I
So
think.
Uranus and Taurus, as we've talked about for, God, we're in year 4 of talking about Uranus and Taurus. Uranus and Taurus does a disruption on things that are supposed to be normal and safe and just assumed, right? It's normal inputs. It's food, it's energy. It's like what's supposed to be normal, Taurus, right? All these things that you're supposed to be able to just rely on, right? Are subject to the radical disruption that Uranus brings for that 7-year block of time, right? And so Uranus has, in addition to just being in Taurus, where it always does this, been configured to Saturn over the last year and a half, which makes it nastier and more deprivation based, and on a cultural level, also brings a lot of it. Saturn Uranus looks like protests for lots of different reasons by lots of different people.
It's quite literally, what are you doing without, isn't it? Like, it's what are you cutting and taking away? And so baby food, right?
Right. Or like, if we just read Saturn as like the system as it is in any place, Uranus is the dissent against that. And when those two, and dissent always exists, a system always exists, or almost always. Whenever there's a system, there's dissent, but the two aren't always configured in such a way that they're in direct conflict, right? But during the Saturn square Uranus years, they are in direct conflict. They directly get in each other's way. Now, what started last November and is going to run through, it's basically going to run for about another year with a bit of a tail after that, but for about another year from now, is that the eclipse cycle, Rahu and Ketu, the nodes, the head and tail of the dragon, the eclipse cycle has coincided with that Uranus and Taurus placement, right? And so it's the head of the dragon side. So the eclipses, starting last November, last November was like a half into the cycle, half in the old cycle. This May, April 30th, in the middle of May, that pair of eclipses was the first pair of eclipses that was fully on the same axis as the disrupting the food and disrupting dinner and gas station, Uranus and Taurus. And here we go, right? And so that eclipse boost or amplification of Uranus and Taurus disrupting, these normal, the normal necessities. That's every 6 months for about another year. And then it'll probably take 6 months after that for that particular pattern to wash out. Right. So if we're looking at the food and energy disruptions, which, of course, kind of input into anything, right? Because with Taurus, we're looking at like fundamental, supportive, necessary inputs for everything. Right.
Yeah.
And so whatever cost hike happens there distributes through almost everything else. Right. Yeah. And everybody bears the brunt of a rise in food, right? Because there's nobody who doesn't eat. And if you live in a
maybe us two skinny legends, but other than that,
right. But yeah, and unless you live in like a non-electrified country, then everybody consumes power, right? Yeah. And so that like super amping up of the Uranus and Taurus, which I believe I talked about 6 months ago because it was one of my big concerns for the year. Like now we're in that, and now we're like, okay, who gets the bread riots, right? Yeah. Where do the bread riots happen? When do they happen? And then what political effect do they have in which countries, right? Yeah. It's not. Oh, well, maybe we'll just figure it out as a global village and everybody will eat, right? It's when and where are the bread riots? Which I believe they've already started.
They have. A bunch of places. I did not have Sri Lanka as the first country to collapse completely. I didn't look, but it has. So there'll be more of that in the kind of peripheral economies in the next 18 months for sure. But I don't think Western countries get out of this without a bread riot or two. Particularly if it's amazing that it kind of didn't happen. Not that I think it's only about 30% of parents actually use baby formula or something anyway. It was sort of lower numbers, but you think, good God, there was sort of 3 weeks there where you couldn't get food for your baby. Like, what the shit?
Yeah, that's pretty.
One of those, you want to riot? That's how that's, you think January 6th was bad? Try that again, right? I just thought that was amazing, right? This is the sort of world we have for the next 18 months. And it's,
Well,
I don't know. I think about this a lot. Like what a time to be alive. What a time to bear witness to some fairly epochal moments.
Absolutely. So what's interesting about this is this, super amplification of the Uranus and Taurus significations by its lineup with the eclipse cycle, right? Just on a simple level, this is the hardest that Uranus and Taurus gets to hit during its 7 years, which are like roughly 2018 to 2025, right?
Yeah.
But it's brought me back to like some of our conversations in when it was first ingressing and like looking at it 6 months afterwards and kind of what is this doing, what is it showing, and look the innovative thing with Uranus is always looking for innovation, being like buying food that's grown locally, maybe growing some of your own food. It was but it was in a sort of wholesome cottage core adjacent sort of way, sort of an animistic, like, participate in the production of your own sustenance. And what's interesting is this like, shadowed, eclipsed, dragon venom infused version of the Uranus and Taurus. What we're getting is like the sort of mandatory nasty version. Be like, oh no, you're not going to be able to buy something that's not produced, close by because the trade lanes are shutting down because of, all this stuff. But it's interesting how the like soft, nice, like spiritually insightful piece of the Uranus and Taurus is still tied to the like big, nasty war, trade breakdown ugliness.
Yeah. So you can, the smell of baked sourdough wafting through your apartment as your car sits empty of fuel for the third week running.
Yeah, or it's just like it's just another set of pressures, right? And it pressurizes it because it's in Taurus, right? It's all these fundamental things. It pressurizes everything else. It's like, and as I've been talking about, I don't remember if it was with you or with on the astrology podcast. I've talked about these things a lot, but there's this Saturn Uranus are both in fixed signs, and the mode of a sign, cardinal, fixed, and mutable, which every student of astrology learns in like week 3, really do matter because they're about how things happen. Cardinal is a big thing all at once, and then you deal with the repercussions of that. So, for example, the COVID and everything else got timed by a big nasty configuration in a cardinal sign, right? So it was this big giant thing and then all the reactions around it. This is fixed sign, right? The Saturn Uranus stuff, it's just ongoing. And it's a background dynamic that's not just one thing, it's just there, right? And so this is the nature of this pressure and of the disruptions is like, a fixed schedule of disruptions and problems, et cetera, et cetera. It's different than like the bomb goes off and then everybody figures out what to do about it in the rubble.
Yeah. That's interesting. I don't know if you've been watching what's going on in Ecuador, but I have been because I was just there and almost bought a property there, right? But the difference between these riots and 2019 is very different between cardinal and fixed. The 2019 was an indigenous uprising, and it achieved a bunch of stuff, and then it was over. And this one, again, they've got kind of like a pro-IMF neoliberal center-right becoming increasingly more draconian president. But on the other side, it isn't just what they've noticed this time is this kind of like grand coalition outside of indigenous people, LGBT, students, and a whole bunch of like barrios in Quito, like entire neighborhoods. And the government's tried a bunch of stuff like closing down the cultural center where they usually gather and so on. So a university opened up. But all the people on the protester side is like, no, settle the fuck in. We're going to stay. We keep doing this until basically we win. And it's the resolve on the kind of IMF funded government side in Quito is the same. It's like, well, we'll just use the military and we'll just use blah, blah, blah. And it's sort of, it's very, this is not a few nights of riot and then back to the farm. This is like, nope, we stay here until we get a new government, until food is more affordable and energy is more affordable. And this is where we are. And I love them. I love Ecuador.
Yeah. And so this like exceedingly fixed set of problems is attested to by the astrology basically until next March.
Yeah.
Right. Because so Uranus is going to be in Taurus for longer than next March. Right. So that's still there, that there's still that that disruptive thing there. But Saturn will have moved on to Pisces. It will be out of configuration. In this case, again, like on a political level, the descent generated by Uranus and Taurus immediately it has a hard angle, like runs immediately into the attempt to defend and stabilize the system that Saturn represents, right? And so Saturn will have moved on by next March. And then we've got a whole new 2.5 years of Saturn and Pisces with Neptune, which I think, which is technically a little bit about outside of our H2 conversation, but also relevant, because what comes after H2 is going to determine what all that stuff that happened in H2 actually meant, right? Yeah. And so, the Saturn, we enter 2.5 years of Saturn in Pisces with Neptune, and I think we're going to see, how should we say, systems sort of slowly falling apart and drifting into not like a stern incoherence, which is where a lot of systems are now, where they're like, no, it's going to be this way. I know this doesn't make any sense, right, as subtext, but like we're in control, or we're going to control this, into like, I don't know, kind of like an accepted, I don't know, not accepted exactly, but a more like baseline incompetence, but also a level of not even trying on the level. It
sounds like a lot of Pisces I know, so go on.
Yeah, like Saturn, like Saturn, just on a strictly astrological level, Saturn is very strong in Aquarius, and so the attempts of systems to say in the face of ongoing crises to be like, nope, we're in control, we're going to do this, even if it's not working. Even if it's generating a lot of dissent, there's still an attempt to be in control. There's not like, things are fucked up, we're doing what we can, I guess, right? Whereas I think Neptune's movement into Pisces is almost like the inevitable, like, we don't, like, nobody knows what the fuck is going on, sort of things slide into like inertial decay, next phase, which we've got a lot of fixed crisising to do before then, but there's going to be a lot of like, we don't know what to do, or like, just nobody believes the spokesmen from whatever institutions that are like, oh no, we got a plan.
It sounds positively utopian at the moment.
I would say I think Neptune and Pisces is going to be at least, how should we say, like an acknowledged dystopia.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. Where it's not. How should we say it's?
It also seems like naval battles to me, right? Like Saturn and Neptune in Pisces, because that's where Saturn's going to be when we hit the actual beginning of proper World War III in Armstrong's model. And I think
so. I don't think it's going to be World War. I've been thinking about this. I don't think it's going to be World War III. I think it will. I think the like. So let me just to back up to my frame on this. We are absolutely doing an etch-a-sketch to the global order this decade. And it
Yeah.
takes this decade, right?
Yeah.
And so World War II was another etch-a-sketch, completely reconfigured the global order. We're definitely doing an etch-a-sketch. I think the model that makes the most sense to me, and also just pings the the age of error astrology perfectly, is Peter Zehan's thesis that basically we're doing this phase of deglobalization, and people are finding out how much was dependent, like national boundaries, peace in different areas, the prosperity of different areas, the ability of areas to feed themselves, how much was dependent on this system of relationships. And that I think we're going to be looking at, over the course of the rest of the decade, I think it's multiple internal regional crises, Europe, East Asia, probably North America, the Middle East, while there are, and that's going to be mixed in with significant regional conflicts. But I think almost every region will be pulled in the other direction by its own significant internal regional conflicts, and that this will have that same etch-a-sketching effect. But I don't think it's all. I think it's like, if we're looking at I think it's like halfway between. It's like half Civil War, half external, and therefore not a perfect match for either. That makes sense. That's
It
kind of
does.
the vibe
Like
that
one
I'm
of the
getting
things,
from.
yeah. I think Peter Zian, I used to like a lot of his stuff, but he's a bit myopic at the moment because the majority of his clients are US military or military industrial, because he's ex-Stratfor, and he kind of just tells them what they want to hear about Russia and China at the moment. And it's just, I don't think he has a credible grasp of the threat they can actually bring to bear on the US at the moment. He does seem overly confident. Not that the US Navy isn't the most powerful force the world has ever known, but the clock is ticking on that kind of naval supremacy. So I've been very disappointed with him over the last 18 months, which is fine.
Well, yeah, and we can leave. I'm not dragging everything that Zehan says in. I think his deglobalization thesis is
Very
a
much
perfect match for the age of error. Literally began, he'd been saying it for, I don't know, 10 years, but it actually became correct as soon as we hit the age of error in 2020. Age of error is scattering, right? It removes absolute hegemons, which unfreezes local and regional conflicts. Like, that's so age of error. I think that's the thesis I'm bringing in, and multiple internal regional crises is my take. I think there will be things not unlike Ukraine, but I think everybody's going to be too busy with their own internal conflicts to get sucked into a world war.
Well, we can hope so, right? Because the trouble with, there are some psychopaths, like neoliberal psychopaths, that don't. It's kind of one of the ways we get to that age of air multipolar world, where there are people who like literally think nuclear war between Russia and the US is like the best option. And at the moment, and that's mostly State Department rather than military, as far as I can tell. So as far as I can tell at the moment, there is actually some, and thank God for this, what's the word I'm looking for here? Military wisdom at the Joint Chiefs level that has been chastising an out of control State Department. So we can hope so. But one of the things I wanted to talk about in that level was how we define war, right? Because the Armstrong model has World War III starting sometime between 2024 and 2027, and not before. Not that conflict doesn't escalate between now and then, but that's when.
So let me add an astro piece to that.
Yeah.
Right. In 2025, we move from Saturn in Pisces to Saturn in Aries. Saturn and Neptune moves at almost exactly the same time. So we go from the Saturn-Neptune combination in Pisces, which, it ain't great, but it's also like kind of passive, right? It's just like, oh, things are falling apart, and there are certainly sins of omission, right? But Saturn, Neptune, and Aries is going to be active mistakes. And it's literally a Mars ruled sign. It's just much more like balls to the wall, stupid.
That tracks. That's where I think, and this is like, because Lavrov says that we're in a situation of total war already. He said that in February, and this is like, historians can say that. He's not a historian, but actually, I don't know what he studied. I don't care. Historians can look back and go, well, when did World War One start? Was it actually Franz Ferdinand, or was it the inertia of different kind of like incestuous governances in Europe and blah, 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 right? And we'll end up in that kind of situation too, but it kind of matters a lot for astrology, right? Because you have to elect. You actually have to pick, like, well, when does it fucking start? Because and I do think it's kind of like you could jump up and down between the dimensions, so that you can have a diffuse total war has begun Lavrovian read that starts now, and we kind of looked at the Uranus and Taurus squaring Saturn as how some of that plays out, right? But then there is the kind of like, okay, that's all well and good, but when is it sort of like boots in the street type shit? And that looks, according to the astrology, then like 2025 might be one of them. But like, what even counts as war, Yeah.
I would say that's when and again, I don't think it's a World War III scenario. I think it's the era of simultaneous crisis in different places for different reasons that are a result of the unfreezing of regional conflicts and the dissolution of the international trade order that was, the post-Bretton Woods thing.
Yeah. And it's funny, like, I think, you go.
I was just saying, and that's not necessarily a pleasant prediction. Like, that will not be great for a lot of reasons, but I don't think it looks like I don't think, here's, we're talking about the reasons for World War One. I don't think we're in a position where lots of different nation states and regions are willing to go in on a big conflict. There's a willingness to do that in the past that I don't think is going to be there. I think everybody's going to be too busy with their own internal divides, some of which will go hot. Absolutely.
Yeah, true. All right. We can but hope. It's funny because it doesn't. Let's say it starts in 2025. Between now and then, we lose Taiwan, which means we lose 90% of chip manufacturer. We may assume, especially as conflicts escalate, that access to hydrocarbons is uneven, and other kind of thing, like all the sort of supply chain disruptions that we're experiencing now get worse before they get better. And there's presumably, as a result of that and other things, curtailments on your movement. So it's kind of like, you don't need a war if you're going to be living through what it would be like to be in a war anyway, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's going to have the same effect on the map as a world war, and on alliances and who does what together, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it, to a great degree, depends on if the place you live can do the Uranus and Taurus localization thing. Like true. If it has to, can your country do food without imports or with less imports? If it has to, is your country energy sufficient, right? And the places where the answer is no, or like, a big no, those are the places that are going to change most during this period.
Yeah. And also that kind of, that works not so, that also, I would argue or say it works more urgently on a local rather than national level. So you might have energy security at a national level, but if you live somewhere where you are reliant on supplies from elsewhere in the country or whatever, it's not as, that's something you're going to want to like think through for yourself as to how you either adapt to that or leave or what have you, because there are, as we move through the rest of this decade, there are definite winners and losers on a geographic basis.
So one thing I want to add to that like on intra-country level. So no city is self-sufficient for
Yeah.
food and energy, right? Like that's just true, right? Cities are concentration points of resources from, larger regions. And so what we've seen literally since the ingress of Uranus and Taurus in 2018 in the United States, I don't know, I haven't seen the statistics for other places, but cities have been leaking for the first time since the 2008 crisis. Everybody urbanized as a reaction to the 2008 crisis here. And then the reversal of that trend started the year that Uranus went into Taurus, and then COVID and all that ended up accelerating that reverse trend, right? And if we're just talking about places that don't make their own food and energy, that's every large city, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that deurbanization trend, or at least the deurbanization trend sticks at least until the end of Uranus and Taurus. And during this acceleration of Uranus and Taurus with the eclipses over the next year and a bit, we may see like a big wave of deurbanization, which makes sense if you fear the plague, you don't want to live in a place where there are high concentrations of people and the air is bad, right?
Yeah.
If you are worried about food, then you want to, move to the country or move out of a place that is by design and definition food insecure, et cetera, et cetera.
And the surveillance and, tyranny and the rest of it. It's what happens at these periods, right? Like the outside of it is, it's funny because we've been doing a lot of forecasting and scenario planning and whatever for years around this in the members area. And I do, and it's still technically true that to say, like, listen, I don't care if you leave the cities or not, but I do want you to be open-eyed and cold-hearted in your risk assessment. And I want you to know that if you opt to stay in a city, then these are the kind of scenarios you're looking at. But I was listening to Chris Knowles on Higher Side Chats on the flight down here yesterday, whenever that was. And at the end of it, he basically just says, get out of the cities. If you're in the city, get out. And I'm like, good for you. Good for you for actually saying, get out of the cities, because I want to say that. It's just every time I do, and I understand it, there are people who will say, listen, I'm an ER nurse in San Diego. I'm ride or die with this city. And I'm like, cool, then stay. But please don't think just because you're ride or die with the city that it'll sort of be all right. The cities get it worse in this period. That just is what it is,
Yeah, well, you're going to say, are you okay with staying where you are, knowing that it's going to be a worse deal every year for probably at least the next 3 years?
Yes, exactly.
Right, because it's not a great deal for a lot of people as it is.
Yeah.
For most people, right? There are absolute circumstances where it makes sense to stay, even if it's, even if it gets a little weird, a little ugly, a little wild.
Yeah. But I think it's more like, don't, please be cold and callous and unemotional in your risk assessment and scenario planning. And that includes, but that also works in reverse too. Like I kind of said in a recent video, we can't all be chicken wizards. Like, also don't flee the city in terror and like overextend. And if you've never grown a fucking rose before, buy a whole bunch of farmland and be like, right, back to the land for me, because you will fuck yourself doing that too. Like Uranus and Taurus, as you say, it's terrestrial disruption, and you could really fuck that up. So it's more, I guess, an argument for like, please plan like a lizard. Please plan nice and cold and unemotional, right? Because this is very easy to fuck up, because this is a scary time, and it gets scarier before it gets less scary, I think is what I want to say.
Yeah. And as the last several years have made, I think, very obvious, it is cheaper and easier to figure out and make like a relocation or a big change, whether it's job or place, or often job and place, between the ongoing crises, between the dramatic hits of the ongoing crises, right? Like just when everybody else is like catching their breath, that's the time to make the moves, right? Because when you make a move, because the sky has started falling again, you're one of many people trying to do it at the same time. Right? Like, don't wait for that like fire to get lit under your ass. If you know that it's something you're kind of planning, you're like, yeah, I really need to get out of X and get into this situation here. I've been looking at, these two different towns, blah, blah, blah. Like, do that in between this, the everything is on fire cycle, because it's cheaper and it's easier.
And this is a good time to kind of talk about the second half of the year properly then, because again, in the model I'm looking at, well, in either model, in any of these models, it gets worse later. So it strikes me that this is one of the windows. It's interesting, right? So I've just done, like I said, 3 months so far of jaunting about. And it's funny to hear the people who say, oh, things are opening up and getting back to normal again. And some people are saying that, wrong. And then there are other people going like, yeah, for however long this lasts. And I'm like, that's better. That's correct, But so, like, let's talk about the second half of the year and maybe even bleed it into. Let's have a long H2, maybe ending in Saturn and Pisces, right? But like,
right.
Because it strikes me that now is a good time for taking that kind of planning seriously. It's in the next little chunk of time, and I'm mostly just basing that on. I guess it depends where you are. I'm mostly just basing that on stuff that I know has to happen middle of the decade. But yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I will try to cut this down to landmark things in this time frame. So the trouble is kind of the same trouble that we've been doing. It's this fixed crisis thing, right? And it does a couple things. Right. It makes dinner more expensive or unavailable. It makes, energy more expensive or unavailable. And it amplifies loud political dissent within systems. Right. And it does lots of other little things, but that's probably a good top 3. Right. And we keep getting things that do all 3 of those. Right. And so the next delivery of those is going to be Mars hitting Uranus and Rahu and squaring Saturn at the end of July and the first part of August. Right. So like the next round of being served exactly that, which we know to some of which we know is baked in because of the trade disruptions from the Russo-Ukrainian conflict, which some of which were immediate and then some of which are baked in but not delivered yet, right? Yeah. So basically, I'll just say last third of July, first third of August, or we could maybe extend that to second half of July, first half of August. That's all like lit up again with Mars.
So that's interesting because Armstrong's got so looking at the rest of the year, it's like everything that's in play is in play. There is war.
Yeah, exactly.
There is political incompetence, and what's going to be a very bracing midterm because they can't win and they need to. So that's going to suck. But there's nothing. There's a couple of conflicts they're trying to start, but that's still underneath war, right? So the second half of the year is kind of like sometimes it's better, sometimes it's worse. It's like sometimes the diarrhea is hot. Sometimes it isn't, and it's just this kind of at least you know what you're going to get more or less for the second half of the year. But the hottest point for escalation of military conflict specifically in the Armstrong model is August. So there you go.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean that one, that like second half of July and then second half of August. I would say first half of August. Sorry, the August side is definitely hotter. Mm-hmm. I just didn't want to leave the first half of July out because there will be a palpable buildup.
Yeah.
But I would expect more of the dramatic things to happen once we get into August. And again, Mars is involved. Makes sense with military stuff. I think in terms of the existing Russo-Ukrainian conflict, it's interesting because it's Mars and Taurus. And just as the Mars, Jupiter, and Aries looked like offensives And of course, both sides started offensives within the first 3 or 4 days of Mars being in Aries with Jupiter. And some of those have been very successful. I wonder with Mars entering Taurus, which it does on the 5th of July, and is there until mid-August, if we're looking at an attrition situation, right? Because Mars in Taurus doesn't win by attacking. Mars in Taurus wins by having the food, right? Or having the bodies, right? Again, it's like very fundamental supply stuff. And so, I could see major shifts occurring as a result of that once we're, a month into that more attrition phase.
Interesting. Because the only...
Well, and we also have if what the Uranus, Saturn, Rahu thing does every time it's activated, one of the things it does is, again, the internal descent, often connected to where's dinner, where's gas, right? We have the bread riot thing. And so do we get more conflicts, in other places? Do we have other fires that start as a result of that? I would say probably yes.
Yeah, I would, when I look at, so the places that get the most amount of grain from Russia and Ukraine are North Africa and Indonesia, right? And North Africa has already done bread riots in the last decade or so, and I imagine they'll do that again. But from a supply perspective, that becomes acute in Q4. There's kind of enough for now, but if they don't get more, that's when you start to see it. Right. So it's sort of really interesting to see where. Yeah.
And so this same configuration gets hit again by eclipses in Q4.
Yeah.
It's this thing gets hit hard 3 times between now and the end of the year. The first one is Mars crossing through it. Again, second half of July, first half of August. And then we get in end of August, September, we get Saturn and Uranus square within a degree. It's funny, they don't quite perfect the aspect to the minute, but they are 90-degree angle. They hold a 90-degree angle for a month. So that's going to be enough to do that again. And then we get to the eclipses, which are very end of October, might as well be November. Let's just call it November with a little bit of beginning in the last few days of October. But we get the eclipses again on the Saturn Uranus, right? And it's going to be, again, we know, and I talked about this in our Q1 episode. It's everything's set up. It's these same things over and over and over again. Yeah. Just with some war now, right? But there was some war before. Ask the Yemenis, right? Yeah. And so it's just this over and over again, right? And it creates political dissent. It makes things more expensive, et cetera. It makes them expensive or unavailable, which is an indictment of the systems that are supposed to stabilize things, which, it's that. And we get three different versions of that without really anything that is a counterpoint, right? Yeah. So it's this, and then there's nothing. I don't really see anything that's a significant stabilizing counterpoint during this period of time. Jupiter's job is to temper, to balance, to fix, or to come up with remedies for problems. And Jupiter, for at least the next 4 months, is in Aries, where it's good for boldness and confidence and martial activities, right? So Jupiter in Aries is good for war on a global level. It's good for on a personal level, it doesn't have to be war, right? Confidence and boldness and saying what you really mean rather than, beating around the bush. Those are not necessarily, machine gunning people in the street things. Those can be absorbed on an individual level and on a cultural level in a positive way. But in terms of what is Jupiter capable of fixing or counterpointing in the sky? Like none of this stuff. Jupiter in Aries is not dropping grain or fuel or creating peace.
Yeah.
And
I suppose the
then
best we can say is that it is the wise general. So, like,
well,
hopefully it's that rather than, because there are still, when you're in such a martial time, the best you can, and certainly when you're not just in a martial time, but across the entire planet, the level of political incompetence is like we haven't seen in centuries. Like there isn't a good leader anywhere, right? And so you kind of have to hope that you have good generals.
that's
So
interesting.
Jupiter in Aries is my fingers crossed,
Oh, I like that. I like that take on like the world, right? Right, because there's no king, there's no queen, there's just it's like they're all pretty terrible. But like in terms of who pushes the button, or who how should we say obeys the order to push the button, or who
Yes.
advises against pushing the button, that's that like general class role that you're talking about. On a personal level, I think of Jupiter in Aries. I always think of Pai Mei from the Kill Bill movies. It's
Okay.
the cruel teacher of martial virtue,
Yeah, that's
right?
cool.
Right? Like you cannot become tough without suffering,
Yeah.
right? But there's a smart way to learn, to learn how to be tough and to suffer intentionally to make yourself stronger, more resilient, and to make your whatever your shit, your family, et cetera, stronger, more resilient, and have more martial virtue. But I think of like a martial teacher or guru, right? Like somebody who can show you the way of. And yeah, maybe it's Pi.
Oh, yeah, no, it's all good. I'll chat while we well, I say I'll chat. I'm very jet lagged. I can't vamp on my own in this state. This is actually one of the reasons. There are a few guests that I have. Obviously, Paul Weston is one of them, where I can just sit back and be regaled with stories. Austin's another where it's like, yes, it's an Austin episode. Awesome. Suffer smartly in the chat. Yeah, I quite like that. I think that's a good way of thinking about it. So what did we do just then? So Mars, Jupiter, the eclipses, good. Still there? If you're listening to this on audio, Austin's like holding his finger up like, one moment. I'll just narrate it like it's cricket on the radio. Speaking of war, we learned all about that in school. Oh, by the way, I should also mention, if you are looking at ways to manage and mitigate around inflation, we've been doing that for years in the members area. There's a whole bunch of stuff on it, including even, you may not think, I'm going to talk about this because I think this is important. You may not think that investment is somehow for you because you don't have like a share portfolio or something. That's not really what investment is, right? Investment is total allocation of resources, including your time. And the fact that we're in a time of tremendous energy and food inflation means that you are in an investment situation and you're not correctly positioned, right? And so it's at that level we begin the discussions about how you can, what you can do on household bases, on bases, and so on, because that's kind of how it works. I actually do make notes for this show. I was teasing about that. Are you back, Austin? No, I can see your mouth moving. I always look cute, Lindsay. What are you talking about? And it's not tonight, it's morning here. And it's not bad for like traveling for a day and a half. All right. Super weird that like knocking the cable out brings us back to the old silence. Kate, it's funny you mentioned the new haircut. Having just wailed on Austin as a place. This was one. Oh, no, you're back.
Tess says, okay. Literally nothing changed from. All right. Anyway, sorry about that. I gesticulated wildly and knocked the mic cord out. It was all this martial talk.
Exactly.
But yeah, and maybe the whatever the archetype of the martial teacher isn't as big an asshole as Pai Mei. Maybe it's more like, it could also be the coach, right? They're like, all right, buddy, we got to get out there. We got to do this. We got to work as a team, right? Because there is a social aspect of the martial, but it's about working together under pressure with great risk in order to achieve a goal as a unit, right? So there's the individual martial, and then there's the social martial, which is, it's a very pressurized and specific and hierarchy necessitated form of martial, right? But
So
regardless,
Jupiter in Aries for 4 or so months. Does he slide back out somewhere else or
he
head
does.
forward? Yeah.
And so it's Jupiter back into Pisces, which under other circumstances I would be excited about. And it'll be nice for some people, like a few people, if you have planets at or angles at the very end of Pisces, it'll feel nice, right? But Jupiter doesn't. So Jupiter at the very end of October slides back into Pisces, but doesn't really go much further than that, and is contradicted or squared by sign by Mars and Gemini the whole time, right? And so the Jupiter in Pisces, I don't think, is in a position to fix things or counterpoint the difficulties. For I don't know, 1/10 of people who have something around there, it'll be nice. But on a like watching the world, it doesn't really fix shit. And part of that is it's just not very long. It's just those last degrees. It doesn't really aspect that much. But a big part of it is that whatever it does is strongly contradicted by the other main component of Q3 and Q4 and Q1, and that is Mars's retrograde cycle in Gemini.
Right.
So with a Mars retrograde, Mars goes a couple things. Mars goes retrograde less often than any other planet. It's only once every 2 years, but will stay retrograde for like 2.5 months at a time. And will, because it's so slow and it's going forward and then backing up and then going forward, you'll get Mars staying in a single sign for something like 7, 8, 9 months, right? And so this time around, we get Mars entering Gemini at it is Mars enters Gemini middle of August, I believe. Let me just double check that. Yeah, it's middle of August, and then it's not out until the end of March. It's not out of Gemini until the end of March of 2023, right? So if you have planets in Gemini, it's a ridiculously long period of martial presence, right? Things are hotter, they move faster at a schedule that's often not convenient. Like there's a lot to do, there's more conflict to manage, et cetera, for anything living in Gemini or anyone living in Gemini, right? And that's, it's quite a few months, right? August to end of March. And
I love that for me.
Yeah, it's great for both of us. I'm really excited about it. When I was looking at the year ahead last fall, I was like, "Oh, that's awesome."
That's gonna be what a fun summer I shall have. All right.
So what I will say is that the first part, not a huge deal. The first part of Mars's ingress into Gemini is going to feel like a relief because it's no longer in Taurus, because it was stirring up a ton of shit in Taurus, right? So it'll actually, for the first little bit, it'll feel like a downgrade in the level of martial activity, which is good. But as it gets closer and closer to the retrograde station, is very end of October. And so there's really, I was talking about the eclipse, the next set of eclipses pinging the Uranus Saturn thing, right? The where's dinner? This government sucks. Where's dinner? And so that's happening by itself. Mars also stations retrograde like within 36 hours of the first eclipse that starts off that series. So it'll be a really exciting, and it'll be a really exciting last week of October and first 2 weeks of November, right?
That's
Which
midterms. Midterms are the 8th, right?
I believe, I don't know if they're the 8th, but they're within the window.
Yeah, cool.
So yeah, and it's like, well, of course, right?
Exactly.
If the
What
astrology
did
was
you
really
expect?
good during those
Yeah.
times, then astrology could be meaningfully accused of being totally fake, right? It
Yes,
should
agreed.
look like shit.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, Tuesday
It's
the
interesting, like
30th.
looking at
Oh, that's actually
the
the day. That's like more or less the day of an eclipse. So that's fun.
nice. Yeah, that'll be. I mean, like again, it comes back to like what a time to be alive and things to watch, right? This kind of triplicity transition is very interesting. But
Yeah, well, and it's
so
in. Yeah, go ahead.
no, I want to. If you got something to say there, do it because I want to jump back to Mars and Gemini and Q1. But yeah,
Yeah, so no, let's stick with Mars and Gemini. I have a lot to say about it, but as
yeah,
long as
cool.
you're not leading us off course.
No, that's where I want to go. But no, mostly
Perfect.
because if the Socrates forecast for Europe in particular is more of this shit and their ham-fisted digital currency and COVID Green Pass, which we get this year. But from a conflict escalation perspective, it's Q1 of next year is where like the first opportunity for like, dare I say, a proper land war in Europe begins. And that is in keeping with how Russia has been playing it, right? Because they're in no hurry. And obviously Russia is at a +5 multiplier when it's winter and they get to switch the gas on and off, right? So that kind
Right.
of tracks, but it's sort of interesting because it depends how long they're prepared to wait to take Kaliningrad back. So I kind of think there might be a little bit more of a mess towards
Right.
the end of the year, land war wise there. But in the forecast, it's got Q1 is where the conflict escalates properly in Europe. Oh wait, have you gone silent again? You and your gesticulations.
Can you hear me?
Oh, you're back. Yeah, you're back.
Okay, yeah. Um, so one thing about Mars retrogrades when we're looking at war is you actually see Mars retrogrades in the lead up to war or not.
Oh,
Right.
interesting.
I
That
see
tracks. Yeah.
them, and I'd love to do a more exhaustive study, but from what I've seen, I see two different circumstances with Mars retrogrades. One, the country's already deep into a conflict, and the Mars retrogrades are when it gets really off plan and confused, and it's like,
Mm-hmm.
what are we doing, and what is the plan, and do we need to do a different plan? Do we just keep forward? It's confusing. And then the other version of Mars retrograde that I've seen a couple times is I'm thinking of the U.S. There was a Mars retrograde that led up to the Desert Storm, and then there was a Mars retrograde that led up to the German offensive that began World War II. But it's like it's a lead up to. It's the like, I don't know, are we really going to do this? Or let's kick the tires on on all the equipment. Then you also have like lead ups to, and then it's like, no, the answer is no. But if we're
That's
talking
cool.
about if we're talking about retrograde motion as translating usually with translating with the humans into ambivalence, right? But like how should we say, heartfelt ambivalence, like, God, do we do this or not? Right?
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense because
It does. I'll tell
that
you what, too, right? Like we're already seeing tremendous cracks in the EU, because they don't like it is beyond stupid to pick a fight with where you get your fuel from for a start, and half the countries know that. And I think as those countries start to get colder and colder, I think you're going to get some of that Mars retrograde reconsidering of martial positions inside the EU. We can hope, right? So that's kind of interesting that we've sort of got like a period that leads up to either war or not war.
well, and so
as
and
it
Mars
has in
goes
fact got colder.
direct January 16th or
Right.
12th. Sorry, January 12th.
Okay.
And then it's got months of covering the same degrees. It's already covered twice. So it's like going over the same shit again for the third time. Right. But this time in a like, this is what we're going with this time. But there's like, there's definitely like an anxious ambivalence about war during that time, without a doubt. And it's worth noting, and it's worth noting that Mars retrograde in Gemini is a very significant transit for the United States, because the U.S., if we use the Sibley chart, which I like, which works for a lot of things, has Mars in Gemini. And it also has Uranus in Gemini, which again gives you that like disruptive, shocking sort of energy, right? And so we have like 8 months of the United States having a Mars return, right? Which I don't know. It'd be nice if the United States could just go a decade or two or three without having a Mars return.
Yeah, it feels like
and
it.
So, and another thing to note is when we're looking at Mars, it's not just Mars and Mars retrograde. It's Mars. It's Mars in Gemini, right? And part of the nature of Gemini is it's divisive. It's polarizing. That's what it does, right? And it's like, okay, so let's divide this. Like, who's for this? Who's against this? Argue with each other now, right? And it brings out the like two conflicting sides. On a personal level, Mars retrograde in Gemini will probably feel really anxious, right? We're like, oh, I don't know whether I should do this or that. And then you're frozen between wanting to run in two directions at once, right? Or to use a explicitly martial metaphor, right? Between fight and flight is freeze.
Yeah.
Right. And so, yeah, it's anxious. It's anxious. And if we're talking about, and so that brings out sort of whatever Gemini polarity there is within an entity contemplating martial action, right? The United States has polarities aplenty. I think we're all familiar with them. And, the EU sort of as a project was, what if we could create a structure that could contain all of those polarities within the Western European nations, which as a project seems increasingly less capable of containing that. And to go back to a thing we've been talking about for a while, all this Uranus, Saturn, fixed crisis stuff, that it all nails the EU chart.
Yes.
It nails the EU chart. It nails the EU chart, right? And so, that getting nailed again during the H1, like this is what it looks like right now. Some of those difference in the different, how should I say, just the differences that are a result of just being in a different part of land that's here, that has this, that doesn't have that, that's closer to this, that's farther from that, like that, that creates different attitudes towards the big war, right? Yeah. That's, is it 50 miles away or is it 500 miles away, right? Is it fucking matters, right? And so that's, how should we say, ample fodder for disagreement, right? Or like, well, we've got enough power. Well, we don't. Yeah. Right. These are very like Zahanian conflicts, right? It's not ideological. It's like, well, we don't have the food. Well, we do, right? You're going to have different opinions based on that. Yeah.
So do you think there is an opportunity, just going back to the US then, for this to be a mature Mars retrograde? Because it strikes me that this is the moment, as like, particularly if the Socrates model is right, that we actually get an expansion of the land war in Russia, it will be a time for the US to go, well, are we still the global cop? Like, and do we mean that enough to go to war with Russia in Europe? Or is it time to kind of gracefully take the British Empire route and begin to kind of, can we get to a multipolar world without World War III? So it seems to me like this is the first Mars retrograde in a long time where the US has to look existentially at its military soul, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely, like, from a larger, like a macro perspective, like that's sort of the most important thing. Yeah. Right. Is not just does the U.S. get involved, but is this like the most obvious version of the United States divesting itself of that role as the guarantor of the existing order, right? And it seems like based on age of air stuff as well as what the U.S. has been moving towards for the last while, that the U.S. is less interested in that.
Yeah.
Which doesn't mean no participation. From a strictly military perspective, I talked to a friend, one of whose parents was like is an ex-special forces person right at the beginning of this. And they're like, yeah, the U.S. wants Russia to do this so they can bleed them. And, it's like, yeah, it's like, great. Like, there are certainly planners who say, okay, great, this can be a new Afghanistan. Not an American Afghanistan. Sorry for the non-olds out there, like the Soviet campaign in Afghanistan, which bled the Soviet Union dry of a lot of resources. It cost them much more than they gained from it. And so there's certainly planners who, not that this is a unanimous perspective, but who are like, yeah, great, let's do that. Let's put your hand in the bear trap, and we'll keep giving you reasons to stay there.
Yeah, I also think that's a later justification. So the Russia doesn't invade the way Western countries do, right? Like, it sent in all its shit, all its old tech, and it's in no great hurry. So it looks like bleeding, but it's such a fucking mess. It's such a fucking mess. What an exciting time again to live through. But I think that, it's funny. I was thinking about this before we hit record. When it comes to one of the ways we can get to the multipolar world is if
take a nap until 2032.
If the people running the US recognize the Mean Girls moment that is going on, right? So in the Pax Britannica series, Jan Morris ends her history of like the British Empire with the failed British attempt to take the Suez Canal back in the 70s. And the reason she because by then, by the late 70s, like mid 70s, the British Empire as we knew it in like the late 19th century was long gone. But this was a unilateral action taken by the British that the Americans didn't support. And they didn't not support it. They just didn't say anything. And so the Brits were just kind of left like Mean Girl in the hallway, just like, oh, the winds have changed, right?
Yeah.
And it was this kind of tacit, silent acknowledgement, but that the days of the British Empire are over. And I was reading, what's his name? I was reading some analysis around what appears to be like the whole world saying like Russia has violated the rules-based international order. Well, if you actually count up the number of people on Earth, 75% of the world's population is not going along with this kind of like Anglo-American sanctions trying to start a war with Russia, right? Because obviously if you count China and Russia, there's a lot of people in Eurasia, right? But India, same thing. South America, same thing. So actually the United States is getting a Mean Girls moment where countries aren't actively saying, you guys need to sit the fuck down. They're just shutting up. And that's what happened to the Brits. The empire was kind of like, oh, no one else is behaving like we're the empire anymore. I guess we're not the empire. And it's just sort of interesting if you look at what happened with what's it called? That Conference of the Americas, where AMLO stepped out because the US tried to ban Nicaragua and Venezuela. So a whole bunch of other countries in the Americas were like, well, fuck you then, we're not going to show up. So it was this absolute farce of an event. And we're kind of hitting, and it's just one of those things, I guess, if we can get through the Mars return, there is a real opportunity for like the soul of the United States to kind of move into that post-COP phase, which has to happen one way or the other to get to the multipolar world. Yeah. It's just a question of whether it happens with neocons trying to start a nuclear war or whether it happens in that kind of British way of like, oh, I guess I guess we'll just quietly back away now, right? It's kind of a very fascinating moment to be alive through, I think.
Well, yeah, and that's another effect of like an extended Mars return, right? Any return of a planet to its original position, especially an extended return like this, where the planet happens to do a retrograde there, so it's longer than normal, is coming back to what is our fundamental orientation, in this case to Mars,
Hmm.
right? And it always sets an important precedent moving forward, right? And in the past, like our last one of these in America was it resulted in an invasion of Iraq, right? And that
Yeah.
set a precedent, right? But another way we can see this is this is the this is the first time that we're coming back to that extended return. And what is our new precedent? And I'm saying we because I'm an American. But what is the new precedent? And I do think it will be, well, fuck it, let them sort it out themselves.
That'd be great.
We're food and energy secure. Everybody wants
Hmm.
to trade with us. We've also got our internal harmony is also not great. We've got a lot of shit brewing, right? But and like it's
There's a lot internally that could be prioritized. Feeding
yeah.
babies, building bridges,
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. Like there's a lot of internal stuff, right? And I think
That
that
was
that's a
another thing that Chris mentioned in the high side chats, which I 100% agree with. And it's a real Zian point, which is that on a population basis, for most of its history, the US has been, in a good sense, really insular. It's been like, fuck them, especially fuck Europe. It was really difficult to get Americans to die into European wars. It required some skullduggery to get that to happen. But generally speaking, and this is good, it's like, no, fuck them. We've got, and it's this incredible piece of land with all these like internal navigable freshwater rivers. There's an incredible amount that could, like, the opportunity for the post-COP phase for the United States is wondrous if we can get to it, right? Like, there's just like some incredible stuff could happen, especially as it's looking like it doesn't happen as a single landmass, but it will be like hopefully a friendly collaboration between neighbors, because that's the other thing in this decade that happens is some kind of American divorce. But it's just, I don't even care. I think it's not just that. I think we're reaching the end of the Westphalia legal configuration of how we build countries, right? So, and I think most of us are already living in that world anyway. We're actually kind of living in this. If you're doing it right, you're living in a local context and a global one. So, I mean, we're a good example of that, right? But like, we're sort of fairly quite well embedded. I am anyway, like from like a food and whatever perspective in the valley. But when I think about where my closest friends are, they're not over the valley, and they're
mhm.
elsewhere. And I kind of think we're getting to that world anyway, which I think is exciting. But I have my fingers crossed for that a return of like US insularity in the good sense, like in the sense that most people, and understandably, it's like, what American wants to fucking go to Ukraine and fucking die in a war with Russians? Like, it's mental. Like, who does? No one wants to do that, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think that this is the shape of what I think, is going to happen several times and in several different regions is there's going to be a big, ugly regional thing. And then there's going to be this question is like, okay, do other like big powers jump in from 1,000 miles away or more? And then it's going to be like, no, we've got a lot going on. Right.
Yeah.
And that may come from a position of wisdom, and it may come from like, no, we've got a lot going on. Right.
Yeah.
Like we're kind of doing a cold or a medium warm civil war in whatever region, right? Like in the Middle East, in East Asia, in North Africa, in West Africa, in Northern South America, wherever. I think we're going to see a lot of regional conflicts over the next, the rest of the decade. And there's going to be this, oh, is somebody else going to jump in? And they're going to be like, not so much, right? Maybe there's like, here's some anti-tank weapons, or, I'm not saying this is the end of finger on the scales, right? But it's different than like storming the beach, and I think, again, this is sort of this era of simultaneous crisis that is beginning to develop, that I think won't see its full bloom until we're in that Saturn and Aries period, right? Which is 22 to 27, basically.
Yeah. Well,
That's
we're
okay.
in
The world
now.
needs an Etch-a-Sketch. We've all been complaining about how the world is shaped and how the stability is enforced. And now that stability is starting to come apart, we're all kind of seeing, I think, the value of stability, even if it's stupid, right? It's like, oh boy, like coming to understand the value of peace, even at a concerning cost, right? But this is the other side. This is like, okay, let's take apart, or let's watch things come apart and then come back together, right? And there's that is not an easy or cost-free thing either.
No, it's not. But again, and I mean, I actually did a whole show about this in, I think, February or March, a whole solo show, kind of going like, I opened Chaos Protocols with the Terence McKenna line that the problem isn't to find the answer, it's to face the answer. And this comes back to, on an individual basis, how you navigate risk. And something, actually, Catherine Fitz said this a couple of weeks ago on her Money and Market. She said, we have to do two things at once now. We have to navigate reality and official reality, right? Mm-hmm. And she said, don't base your risk and scenario planning on official reality. You can leave that for like the cocktail party. If you're doing risk analysis, you have to be in reality. Which is to say, there are things that, I mean, I don't care. I've never cared. But like, there is stuff that we know is going to happen that you have to plan for, and there's no sense pretending that it's not. Now, do you bring it up every time you go to a dinner party? Like, no, probably not. Like, read the room. But I think that's one of the, kind of picking up on what you said, one of the things that I'm very interested in making sure people do is navigate those two things. And also, and step one in that is to like see this, like literally see that the rest of this decade is, as far as I can tell, I think this is the worst decade of most people's lives who are alive today, because we have a lot to get through in a short amount of time.
Well, and we've had the worst possible training for it.
Yes.
I'm always reflecting over and over again. I feel like I realize a new way in which I was spoiled by being born, I don't know, at the end of a golden age, for lack of a better term, just in terms of like security and like, oh, the world's going to be this way next year and then the year after. Like the idea that like, these are the, this is how this works and what changes. I was born in 79, right? And so the biggest change that I encountered early was the fall of the Soviet Union, the end of the Cold War, right? Which I've been told we were going to get nuked the whole time when I was a kid. Yeah. And then that just wasn't a problem. And then we got the internet, which seemed like a great idea at first, right?
Yeah.
And then, now we've been hitting points where it's like, oh, like, that whole job that people train for, that doesn't exist anymore. Or, yeah, that pays about a quarter as much. The one version of my story was that I was supposed to become a professor of the humanities, perhaps a professor of philosophy. And if I'd gone that route, I'd be an adjunct professor making, I don't know, the equivalent of $9.25 an hour, right? When you add it all up. But when I think of like, oh my God, but there's a plague. Oh my God, but there's a war. And, just seeing other people and sometimes my own reactions to this, it's like, and I think about history, I think about history all the time. And I'm just like, this was so something a lot of people throughout history could handle. They're like, yeah, war happens. It's fucking terrible. This is, you know, you make the moves that you can when that happens. Or plague. Like, oh yeah, plague happens. Absolutely. And how we were just like literally prepared for a world, you know, this sort of, you know, it was formalized by Fukuyama, you know, being post history at the end of history, right? These things were all supposed to be in the past, and he formalized it, but that was just like, that was a vibe, right?
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
so, you
The
know, he's
late
just the one
90s
who said
Portlandia
it.
vibe. No,
Yeah.
I agree. It's interesting, right? Because like I've just done 3 months of travel, and I've still got a month to go, but like I only have about 4 flights left before I end up back on the farm in August. And when I left in early March to getting here yesterday, left in early March, and I like, because I haven't flown for a couple of years and I keep getting upgraded and whatever. I've been business class, I think, for every flight, right? So it's been as pleasant as travel can get, because there are lounges and what have you. And it's still been fucking awful. And not just it's been fucking awful, it's been getting worse over those 3 months. So it was kind of like awful, but at least I'm leaving the country in March. And then by the time I was getting from Austin to LA the other day, it was just, the airports were horrible, security was horrible, the people who worked there were horrible, the plane was late, the plane wasn't clean. Every part of it went wrong and was shit. And that was for everyone. That wasn't just like, oh, that's wacky that it happens to me. Just kind of thinking about the world that we were promised versus, and it was a naive promise, and we weren't necessarily naive enough to fall for it. But the travel is a really good example of it, right? It's like, oh, you know, you can go and do whatever. You can spend a year backpacking around South America. No, you can't. That doesn't happen for a while, you know. And it's kind of really interesting to be at that point. And I want people to know we're at that point, because it even just, and this is kind of where I want to finish off the show for the next like 20 or so minutes, even if you weren't planning on backpacking around South America for a year, you need to be living in a world that's about to do, or to continue doing, what it's already going to do. And that really changes just like how you sit in the world, right? Like, so one of the things I was talking to Peter Gray about this the other week, when we were talking about the medium term and sort of how to be in this moment without falling into like despair or what's the fucking point, or because I definitely don't do that, you know. And one of the things he said, which I liked, oh, Austin's vanished. I'll just keep on this little rant, not really rant, speech, whatever. Well, one of the things Peter said, which I really liked, is prepare what you can. Like, that's it, right? So this almost comes back to where you're going to live in the world. Like, do you want to flee the cities and become a chicken wizard, or, which, you know, it's not a bad life, or do you not? And also, like, because we're facing Great American Divorce. As far as Socrates is concerned, we're facing World War III or something like it, which we discussed in this episode. There's a whole bunch of as far as I can tell, global cooling, drought, which obviously has a serious impact on food availability and inflation and all the rest of it. So what do you prepare for? Like, everything? Are you going to like fill one room with water, one room with guns? You know, it's sort of prepare what you can is really good advice. But like, as long as you do it, as long as it's not like, oh, well, I can't fucking do anything and then just toddle off into the apocalypse. Like, do take that seriously, but then stop, you know? Prepare what you can is like, right, cool. Like, I have accurately and to the best of my abilities performed a risk assessment, performed multiple scenario plans for my life, and have made the necessary adjustments. Oh, here's Austin. And have made the necessary adjustments and investments. And so I am prepared. And then I'm going to fucking live my life, right? And that's my words, not Peter's. I don't think he would be quite so Southern Californian in how we describe it. But I've been sitting with that, right? Like, I've been sitting with prepare what you can, as long as you do it, is really good goddamn advice.
Let me hopefully add a piece of complementary advice, or at least a complementary perspective, which is that times of what people often refer to as chaos, or what feels like chaos, when you're in a period where things are being rearranged, also offer the, how should we say, the most mobility, both horizontally and
Yeah.
vertically, and probably z-axis as well. And again, I always think of the was it the third century, the third century Chinese general Cao Cao, who, after, when the Han Dynasty basically was in the process of collapsing after 4 centuries of stability, took great advantage. And there's like a romantic history of that time. And it was said that a wise man described him, or maybe it was an astrologer, but he went to somebody for like an assessment of his fate and character, and said, a capable minister in times of peace, a genius in times of chaos.
Yeah. Awesome.
And that and that, like, there's also, like, there are should we say, active moves. There's like preparatory, like, I don't want to get fucked by this moves, but then there's also like, ooh, I like, there are things that I can do, and there are places that I can go. Like, there's a capacity for positional change that's both negative and positive, that's much bigger than during a stable time. And that, like, when everybody has to play musical chairs, like the possibility of changing your position, there's never a greater opportunity to change positions. It just doesn't look like climbing a tower.
No,
Right,
exactly.
like positional change within a society, during a stable society, looks like mountaineering up an institution, and that's not what it looks like right now. But there's actually a greater capacity for change.
I keep telling the members that, sorcerers and the such are made for chaotic times, right? So, and it again comes back to, like, prepare what you can. I think is at least for me, from like how to describe this right, from a personality or even just sentiment basis, I feel I actually enjoy that. And then not just that, but then stepping into the opportunities and excitement that chaos can present, right? Because one of the things that came to me on my month of ayahuasca about, like, how to be, because it was ayahuasca as an energy and as a being, very much about gratitude. So by the end of the ceremonies, you're sort of with your whole heart and soul, you're kind of like, thank you, fire, thank you, water. Like, you're just in this state of profound gratitude to, like, the all, to everything. And one of the things she said during a ceremony is to seek refuge in gratitude. So as we kind of like move through these times, because everyone says this, it's just that the medicine of the apocalypse makes it front and center for people. Like, you could die today, right? You could step under a bus. And people say that typically before they have their fifth drink or something. But it's true. And and the apocalypse is one of those times when you live through an apocalypse, you live through that being very present. Like, that is that's differently and more urgently visible, if not true. And the response to that isn't fear, it's gratitude, right? It's actually like, be literally center gratitude, be grateful for seasonal food, be grateful for, like, what's happening today and in that moment and now. And it's sort of like a prepare what you can and step into something like gratitude, step into, like, being in the world. At least that's how it looks and feels for me at the sort of 3/4 of the way through this last ride of Gordon the White, I guess. Is seeking refuge in gratitude is what I do once I've prepared what I can. What do you think?
That sounds really nice. I think I would like to feel that way more often.
Ayahuasca.
That sounds great. It's it's certainly better than just sort of constant anxiety.
Yeah.
Although, don't beat yourself up about the constant anxiety. Like, it's part of the psychic weather of this time.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean you're broken because you're stressed out by things. You know,
I
it
will
is
say though,
certainly.
you do 18 months of it will break your heart. So if you are, if you're rounding out 12 months, let me be a warning from 6 months further on that journey to step into some anxiety relieving mechanisms. Because I agree, don't feel. It's okay. It's okay to feel. It's okay to feel all the feels. This is these years are times that you've like well and truly come to Earth for, and I actually find a lot of medicine in that too. I'm like I actually came to Earth to at least bear witness to this, but probably be transformed
Yeah,
by it.
from if we're
Yeah.
doing sort of an incarnational sort of thing, it's like I don't know how much braver are the souls around now than the boomers, right? In America, at
Got that
least,
right.
right? That
Got
was
that.
some cowardly motherfuckers incarnating at the dawn of a temporary golden age for them.
That's true. That's true. And by the time this is over, they'll all be gone. Wonderful.
Yeah,
What a paradise.
yeah, no,
Sorry for the boomers listening.
yeah. Sorry,
Yeah. No, it's valid. It's a good point. But I also like so I sort of had I made a few notes on the magic of reframing, and it was what Peter said, like to prepare what you can. It was what ayahuasca said of like seeking refuge and gratitude. And then it was what Gary Luckman said, which I also include in Animistic, which is do the good that you know, right? Like so once you've prepared what you can, there is a lot, and this is real Charles Eisenstein working at the level of the field stuff. Once it's almost like secure your own oxygen mask, but like prepare what you can, and then as we move through this period, do the good that you know is it might be on a global basis, it might be on an international basis, but it's certainly at least on a local basis. It's certainly neighbors and family and whoever you live with and around. And there's stuff you can do, and it doesn't necessarily mean, in fact, it definitely doesn't mean this. It doesn't mean like getting up from wherever you're watching this and going next door and saying like, so maybe it isn't World War III, but it's something like it is like 2025 to 2027. There's an Great American Divorce. Like, don't do that. Let those conversations come to you, right? But also just like people, it's not just you who's feeling anxious. People are
oh no,
with a lot of feels right now. And as I kind of said to the members,
it's probably the top note in the flavor of the psychosphere. It's like,
yes.
It's anxiety, and there's a side of rage this year, or like,
Yeah.
it's anxiety with the side, it's anxiety is right there.
And if you're listening to a show like this and you do magic or astrology or something, and I kind of mentioned this to the members, you have a role to play that's maybe bigger than you think. And it is at the level of doing the good that you know. People are going to want to have discussions that they can't have with their friends or family because they might think they're crazy. Doing the good that you know is literally just like listening to a neighbor or a friend or someone. And again, and this takes practice, not to immediately follow with the verbal dump of like, oh, well, it's going to happen then and this and blah, 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 blah. That's kind of shop talk, right? And let them get to that. But even before you get to it, doing the good that you know is firstly and foremost like being there for people around you. You can, and this is Andean medicine. So in my healing tradition, one of basically the core role of a shaman is to remove hucha and other heavy energy and things like anxiety from the cosmos, right? So when you take it out of a client, when you take it out of a patient, you are taking it out of the cosmos. You're actually moving that energy back into Pachamama and back into flow, right? And everyone who listens to a show like this has that role, has that that biodiverse function of being transformative and transmuting in your life. That's the medicine of magic, that's the medicine of astrology, and you can, and dare I say, must do it almost secretly. Almost like don't sit down with your anxious neighbor and be like, I'm here to transmute your anxiety. Who wants to touch me? Right? Just do it. Right? Just do the good that you know. And that's the sort of and I find medicine not just in doing that, but I find medicine in knowing and knowing quite well at least a dozen people who are also just doing that, who are also just like doing the good that they know. other places in the world. And if you don't, you know me, and I'm doing that. I'm doing my best at it anyway. And that, I think, again, we're facing such overwhelming times, or potentially overwhelming.
Well, yeah, and let me just jump in. When I was talking about,
go for it.
yeah, like when I think about what's happening, and then I think of, I don't know, a dozen historical precedents, and I'm like, God, we're so bad at this, right?
Yeah.
That's actually a reaffirming thing to me. It just shows me, I was like, oh, human beings can totally handle this kind of thing. They can actually handle much scarier than this. I just wasn't. We just weren't. We just didn't know that we were going to have to do this. We were actually told the opposite, and so there's some, confusion there, right? But once you get over the confusion, like the fact that instead of just seeing history as just this brutal, awful place, which it is a valid perspective, but it's also like people have done this. Like from an ancestral perspective, you have so many ancestors who've done this and worse dozens and dozens of times. Like this is not beyond our capacity. And you can say, oh, but now we're all stupid because of social media and blah, blah, blah. And like, yes, that's a factor. But, if we really wanted to go to the lived level at any of the, hundreds of historical examples of like how people got through X, Y, Z and the whole alphabet, there were always specifics that made it harder at that time. Right.
Yes. Exactly.
And so I think even with the, whatever, even with our narcissism, even with widespread narcissism and digital addictions, I still think that people are like, we can do this and we're going to.
Absolutely can. Absolutely
and let me do a little bit of a positive spin on this period, especially from the United States perspective, just because a number of astrologers, including myself, have been looking at, oh shit, Uranus and Gemini, second half of the 20s for 15 plus years. Nick Dagan Best, astrologer, actually wrote and published a book on it. I don't know, 10 years ago. I think maybe 8-10 years ago, called Uranus USA. But we've been looking at this for a long time. And so because the precedents are like World War II and the Civil War and the American Revolution, but one of the things that doesn't get mentioned that I just kind of noticed recently is that the United States is much better after all of those things. True. Civil War, terrible. The U.S. after the Civil War, much better. World War II, terrible. The U.S. after World War II, kind of in a global leadership position for the first time ever, more prosperous, more equal.
Literally, right? America's golden age. Yeah.
Yeah, like literally, like whatever the Uranus and Gemini storm is, like it always, as so far in history, it always looks better afterwards for the U.S. That's not true for Western Europe.
No.
Right. There's a different relationship to the Uranus and Gemini cycle, but there's been a lot of concern about the U.S. version of this, reasonably so, and like it's always better afterwards.
That is the kind of story. The next decade is better too. Like if I look at, if we look at what Socrates has got planned from there are so many things. We talk about this all the time. The governance systems under which we currently exist, the nice way of saying it is they're imperfect. Another way of saying it is that we are literally in the last few years of a governance system that includes and was built on slavery. Like it's the same. Like we're literally in an imperial model, right? And as far as, again, Socrates can tell, we have the invitation to rebuild how we relate post 2032, like on an actual political basis, and that's good. Because let's do a better, like you said, let's do a better version of what we have just been through. And it seems like a long time. Like 10 years seems like a long time. Firstly, especially these last 6 months have been a lot. But 10 years is and isn't a long time. It's not a long time for the amount of stuff we're going to fit in it, and the opportunity.
Yeah, no, that's true. It's going to be an action-packed season.
Yeah. And so one of the things and it actually falls under preparing what you can, is I kind of like cast my mind forward. And you know what? Growing trees helps. So I'll get back heading into spring, and that'll be the third spring that we've had the orchard in. So still 2 years off getting apples for the cider trees, for cider. But like last summer, they grew kind of like tiny little baby apples, which was annoying because you have to go and pull them off so they don't put energy into that rather than branches and roots. But trees, and they're fast growing heritage cider trees, right? And that's like a 7-year turnaround. And I think we're going to put in more trees this spring. And I'm like, they actually won't be into production until 2032. So there's this kind of there's this sort of fun way of living in non-human time that I think might be beneficial for people.
Right. Or
looking at
like planting some, no, I love that. That's like, by just every time you think about those trees, you're already crossing a bridge to the other side of the storm.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. What else? So let's finish off on another final positive note, if you can manage. What do you like in H2 of 2022?
So unfortunately, I don't really, there aren't any particularly juicy moments. There's a lot of like, between the same old Saturn Uranus thing getting activated, there's a lot of like, it's fine. But there aren't, usually there's like, ooh, but this 3 weeks is just delicious. There are a few things that I like, but part of it is that I am like less excited about the juicy positive moments. It's just like, oh God, it's more Saturn Uranus. It's more Saturn Uranus. It's more Saturn Uranus. It's like, it's that. We know what that is. It's a bit tedious. As far as things I do like, I like Mercury's time direct in Virgo. And that's going to be, let's see. So it's early August. Let's see, when does it start? So that starts, August 4th. And then that runs until August 25th.
This is really the best you've got. Is a
and that's while other shit is going on. But it's like the opportunity to think super clearly about the shit that's going on. I like what else do
isn't it?
God,
Mercury direct in Virgo.
Yeah, there's just not like, it's just not great. Like,
yeah,
like there's plenty of okay scattered through it, but like, I don't know, it's not great. I'm not into it. It's not. I'll take H2 of 2022 over H1 or H2 of 2020.
Interesting.
It's not like murderously awful in the same way that 2020 was, where it's like just, new, fresh horror, right? All the time. This is very stale horror, right?
Yeah,
and there's a certain, there's a certain flavor of suffering from having to do the same fucking, like, be like, yep, it's that in the news again. Yep. Somebody sunk the dinner boat, so dinner's not coming again, et cetera, et cetera. But it's not like the unfurling of like vicious new terrors. It's just like that over and over again with like normal enough between it, but not like juicy, better carpe diem or carpe noctem that moment.
No. Well, this is good. I'm glad we spent so much time talking about how to be in this moment, because there's this is the half of the year to really take what we just said seriously, because there's not a lot of choice.
Well, let me share with you conversation I had with Kate, I don't know, a week before we were going to do this. And I was doing all my research and like just, thinking about it and thinking about how I want to talk about it. And I was I had thought about it, but I hadn't thought about how I was going to talk about it yet. And I was like, I don't know. I kind of feel like these are all knowns. I kind of feel like there's almost nothing new. you know, and she helped me think about that. But like part of it is like, if you haven't noticed that this is the case, it's a great time to like be like, yeah, this is just what's happening. Like
Yes.
it's not. I don't think I'm not worried at all about it spiraling out of control into a world war. I'm not. I think that it's equally likely that things go totally back to 2019 normal, and we're just like having fun and being narcissistic and hurting each other's feelings on the internet, but nothing important is happening. Like that's not happening. I don't think the world's coming to an end. It's just like dinner's going to be late and expensive. Gas is going to be late and expensive. Everybody's going to be unhappy with their governance for a variety of very legitimate reasons. The leaders we're not getting competent leaders again in the next 6 months. You know, there may be glimmers of hope somewhere, but they're glimmers, right, in a trash pile. Like it's just this. Like it's just
It's
this.
true.
You already know, like you already know what's up. Like you're already either adapted or not adapted.
Yeah, medicine.
She was like, you should
I
tell him
like
that.
Go ahead. That's true. It's true. Like there's nothing. Aliens don't. Well, because it's. We shouldn't gloss over it because it's actually a big deal. If people are concerned World War III happens this half, it doesn't. Like there's actually that's good, right?
That's
so there's
great.
things that, yeah. So there are things we can actually take off the table because at the beginning of the year, although we knew this, but like at the beginning of the year, it wasn't necessarily clear if World War III was on the table, right?
Well,
But
I thought it was going to be very hot proxy wars, and this particular conflict is like the very edge. It's a proxy for the West, but it's a direct involvement for Russia. It's like it's like as close as you can get while still being. It's 50% proxy, right? Yeah. So like that pushed my definition to the point of like it, you know, like the edge of viability or just beyond it. But it is meaningfully different than like you know, in a bare knuckle NATO versus Russia or China conflict.
Exactly. And that doesn't look, the first time that looks likely is actually a ways off in the models I'm looking at, right? So again, but this is good news, right? Like it's just the shit show that you know. That like it's not great.
No, it's not.
There are things you don't have to be concerned about. You don't have to be concerned about World War III and so on. Like that's good.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, you know, and there's something to be said with just accepting what difficulties are known. Like your knowns, there's a lot of known knowns about the second half of the year. They're pretty much the same known knowns as the first half of the year.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's the high note that we've managed to find.
Yeah, maybe you can re-edit it so I talk about how things are better again, or are necessarily better on the other side for the United States. Sorry.
Yeah, exactly.
Other places. For your American viewers. But to be fair, we Americans have all have like a part-time job catastrophizing about America. Like that's part of being American. And so having some counterpoints to that makes the Americans slightly more sane, which makes things slightly less awful for everybody else. That's the theory.
There is also, like, having just been there, you guys need some America-specific medicine. So it's good that we say that. Because, again, this comes back to the gratitude thing, but you're going through, at the moment, the inflation and shortages is worse there than it is in a bunch of other places in the Anglosphere, and just the messaging is so designed to make you all like angry and grim, and it's really tough being American at the moment. And so I want you guys to have some medicine because it's an exhausting place to be just for a week and a half. At the moment, so you know,
I'll co-sign that.
Yeah. We want some America-specific medicine, so that's good. Awesome. All right, so in this exciting H2, in the next 6 months until we next speak, the Santa special. I didn't ask you how Christmas is going to be because I am not ready to find out yet.
Well, it's one of probably my least favorite moment in the next 6 months is in December. It's early December, though.
Okay.
At the heart of every Mars retrograde is an exact opposition between Mars and the Sun, and that's when Mars is brightest and closest to the Earth. And we have a full moon like on exactly that moment. So it's like the most Mars retrograde moment of the whole retrograde cycle. If there's ever a like teetering at the brink of war, holy shit, is this going to happen? It's totally centered around that. I think it's totally centered around that early December full moon on Mars retrograde. Hopefully by Christmas, there will be not war, and we can give gratitude for the full moon on Mars not fucking everything up.
Love it.
That's my hope.
All right. So what do you got going on? Is it more like, are you H2ing yourself? It's like more of the same in my shit show, or have you got exciting things planned?
Yeah, I'm editing old books, hopefully starting a new book. I am seeing the fruit of Sphere and Sentry that I elected and Kate did everything else for in creating all the astrological material, all the juicy moments from H1 coming to life. There's we have the first ever lunar series coming out, which is great because I waited so long to get a good moon in Cancer. It's so hard, and there's so many things that interfere with it that it was only in year 4 of the project that I was able to find something not heinous. So that, I don't know, that should be out within a week of this coming out. There's tons of other goodies that we banked that are coming out. I'm excited to see those unfurl. And what I'm doing, I'm teaching, and my year 2 and 3 programs and my year 1 program. During H1, I opened up the year 1 program so that it's self-paced, but with weekly live sessions, right? So it's not just staring at videos. And I've been doing sort of, how should we say, like tranches of enrollment where I let in X number of people and then chill for 3 or 4 months. Because I don't want it to be overwhelmed, and I don't want the live sessions to be like 150 people where nobody can get heard. But I'm planning on opening up limited enrollment in the self-paced year 1 again in Q3. I'm going to say end of August, maybe middle of August, but I haven't decided. It'll be Q3, but I haven't decided when.
Catch that sweet Mercury and Virgo energy.
I literally probably will.
Yeah.
And then, hey, clarity and being fact-based solves a lot of mental problems that people have right now.
That's true.
Don't shit on Mercury and Virgo. And then let's see, I'm speaking at a conference, the ISARC Astrology Conference, at the end of August. Hopefully, I won't get the plague again. And what else? I don't know. That's probably it.
Seems like a lot. Speaking of the tranches thing, I've got to tell people this because I thought it was really funny. When I started, because I'm expanding the number of energy healing sessions I do per week for H2, but I remember at the very beginning, you told me, and I did not listen, that you said what you should do is every quarter or every half, like just get people's email addresses and then release them so that you know how many in tranches. So you do like a quarter or a half. And I'm like, no, I've got this fancy calendar. I'll just let people book. And it very quickly got booked up 4 months in advance. And it's like, and then people would email going like, I can't get a session with you for 4 or 5 months. And I'm like, there's got to be a better way to do this. Someone told me there's a better way to do this. Who was it?
It was
you.
That was literally a result of years of chaos with scheduling consultations and sessions. You've got to be a little strict and orderly about it because it's so inherently chaotic.
Yeah. And so that's how I'm doing it. In fact, we're going to release a tranche in a couple of weeks because I know when I'm leaving New Zealand, which means, and I'm not going anywhere there. I'm speaking at a conference in September in Australia. But like other than that, I for once know where I'm going to, for this year, I know where I'm going to be. So I can actually have the number of sessions I want and then get it out to people in the email. And when I hit send on that email, I'm going to be thinking of you going, motherfucker was right. This is definitely
it's a wonderful feeling where you're like, I know when I'm going to be working and for who, and there's no missed appointments or too many to do in a period of time. No feeling guilty because they had to wait for 5 months. It's just like, I'm just going to actually do what I'm good at, rather than being, reduced to like, I don't know, an anxiety disordered administrator.
Absolutely. And especially as that person is James for me, I feel extra guilty. He's the one that has to move people around. But yeah, other than that, Fortune's Fools will come out in H2 of this year. It should have been out H1, but I was gallivanting and curing a life-threatening illness. So, it pushed it back. But as you know, the books come out when they come out. But the book's mostly written, and we're working through like the playing cards and everything now. So I think that's my only
That's exciting.
Yeah, it's going to be big, but in the sense that I think that's my big thing for H2. And then otherwise, I'm really looking forward to, I was joking about this before, like jumping franchises from being Gandalf to Ged, like going back to the farm and just like, I don't know, raising goats. I'm looking forward to it. I think that'll be good.
Yeah.
So, those are my plans. And once again, I mean, I know everyone looks forward to these episodes. I certainly do. It's really nice to bounce the ideas off it and get a view. And there's something, I got a bunch of feedback about this. The 6 monthly, it sounded weird to start with, but the 6 monthly ones, no one else is really doing. You get like weeklies and monthlies and so on, but there's a way of being with time twice a year that just seems to work for us, I think. So
it's nice because it limits discussion of what happens within those 6 months to only things that are actually pretty impactful. And it also is a sensible launching point for like longer cycle discussions, because 6 months is already an arc in of itself. Yeah, no, it's really nice. It's nice. I do the monthlies every month on the Astrology podcast, and that's just a different frame. And some of the same stuff sneaks in, but it's a different conversation when we're doing half a year at a time.
And there's something that I think suits our personality types, right? Because if you because you also do the annuals, right, with Chris. So you do like a year ahead. Mm-hmm. And when you do a year ahead, you're sort of obligated to be optimistic. And it's not that we're not optimistic, but there's a level of kind of like business meeting reality that somehow works at the 6 month. He's like, okay, what worked and what didn't?
I think that's interesting. I think there's people's capacity to tolerate some shit and just get through it is literally twice as much when you're doing an every 6 monthly. Right? Because if you're if I say this 6 months sucks, but then things change, you're like, oh, okay, I can do a half a year. But if I'm like, this whole year is
shit, suck. Everyone go back to bed. Yeah.
Right. And then it's like the emotional impact of that it's probably it's probably 4 times as much. Like the emotional, it's probably like a logarithmic increase in impact emotionally.
Fantastic. I think that works. All right. Well, once again, thank you very much. And I shall speak to you, a little bit after Christmas, and we'll look at 2023. Amazing. Okay. And thanks everyone who's been in the chat. This was really, really fun. Thanks for showing up and contributing and sharing and all the rest of it.
All right. Take care, everybody.